The rain tapped gently against the windows of the small cafe in downtown Seattle. But inside, the tension was anything but soft. "Be honest, Claire." Tyler's voice sliced through the murmur of coffee, machines, and distant jazz. "Do you really think I stayed with you because you're cute?" Claire Weston, 26, sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea she had barely touched. Her blonde hair framed a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "You're sweet," he continued, waving a hand in the air, like he was describing a pet. "You're obedient. You're safe. But Claire, you're boring. You're like cardboard. And your chest." He chuckled, without warmth, tapping the table, with his knuckles flatter than this table. The words echoed in her ears long after they were said. She stared at him, her face pale, her lips slightly parted as if they might form a protest, but nothing came. Her throat tightened, her knuckles whitened around the mug. You're serious?" Her voice was barely a whisper, strained and cracking under the weight of disbelief. Tyler stood up, unhurried. "I'm done pretending," he said, slipping his coat on as if he had just wrapped up a business transaction. "I need someone who makes me feel alive. Someone who turns heads when she walks in. You're not that girl, Claire. You never were." He dropped a few bills on the table, enough to cover his espresso, but not the devastation he left behind. Without another glance, he strode to the door, pushed it open, and just beyond the glass, a woman in tight jeans and crimson lipstick stepped into his arms as if they had practiced it. The cafe door chimed softly behind them. Claire didn't move. Around her, life went on. Spoons clinked, coffee steamed. Someone laughed too loudly. But she was somewhere else, entirely. Her tea had long gone cold, like the part of her heart that used to hold Tyler's name. A young waitress passed their table and gave Claire a fleeting glance, one that said, "I saw it, but I won't ask." Then she disappeared into the hum of the cafe. Outside, the drizzle became a downpour. That night, Claire stood in the fluorescent light of her cramped bathroom. The mirror was small and scratched, framed by cracked tiles. She stared at her reflection like she was meeting a stranger, and not in a good way. Her blonde hair fell limp around her face. Her blue eyes looked dull, as if the color had drained out of them. She reached up and slowly unbuttoned her blouse, each movement mechanical, distant. Her collarbones were sharp, her chest flat beneath a faded camisole. Her fingers trembled as they brushed over her skin, unfamiliar and unforgiving. She couldn't stop hearing his voice, cardboard flat. "Not enough," she whispered to the girl in the mirror. "Am I really that invisible?" No answer came. She slid down the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. The cold floor seeped into her skin, but the numbness inside her was worse. Her phone buzzed from the sink. Counter. A notification. Instagram. Tyler had posted a story. Her heart clenched as she opened it. There he was at a bar, that same red-lipped woman beside him, laughing, radiant, her body full, curved, her head on his shoulder. The caption read, "Finally, with someone who gets me." Claire's stomach dropped. She pressed her forehead to her knees, willing herself not to cry. But the tears came anyway. Hot, bitter, unstoppable. With shaking hands, she picked up her phone again and opened Google. She didn't think, she just typed. Discrete breast augmentation, Seattle. A clinic appeared at the top of the search results. Private, 5 stars, glowing. Testimonials. She stared at the screen, her chest heaving, her heart breaking in. Silence. She bookmarked the page. Still on the floor, Claire pressed a hand to her chest, as if trying to feel something, anything beneath the skin. A heartbeat, a reason to believe she was still enough. But all she felt was emptiness. Under the buzz of the flickering bathroom light, Claire whispered to the quiet, "If I change, maybe I'll finally be worth staying for." And the mirror didn't argue. It simply reflected her pain, silent and merciless. The lobby of the private clinic was unlike any Claire had ever seen. No sterile white walls, no sharp chemical scent. Instead, there were warm earth tones, soft jazz playing in the background and a faint hint of lavender in the air. It felt more like a high-end spa than a surgical center. Still, her heart pounded. She had checked in at the front desk under the name Anna Lee. The receptionist hadn't blinked. Discretion, after all, was their promise. Claire sat in the waiting area, her palms slick against her jeans. She wore a simple sweater, her blonde hair pulled into a low ponytail. Her makeup was minimal, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. In her purse, she clutched a folded piece of paper with questions she had planned to ask, just in case she forgot how to speak. A door opened. A nurse called her name, her borrowed name, and led her down a quiet corridor. Claire followed her footsteps, muffled by the thick carpet. When they reached the consultation room, the nurse gestured for her to wait. Moments later, the door opened again, and in walked Dr. Julian Reeves. He was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, dressed in dark slacks and a soft, gray sweater under his white coat, no tee. His sleeves were pushed up, slightly revealing forearms that looked strong, capable. But it was his eyes that caught her breath. They were calm, steady, not invasive, just present. He offered her a small, almost perceptive smile, as if he could sense the storm behind her silence. "Anna, right?" he said gently, extending his hand. She nodded, hesitated, then took it. His grip was warm, steadying. He sat across from her and opened her file. "So," he said, his tone careful but not cold, "what brings you in today?" Claire stared at her hands. The room suddenly felt much too quiet. Her throat tightened. Words were stuck behind her lips, like stones. Julian waited a moment. Then he closed the file. "Let me guess," he said, his voice even, softer now. "You're not here because you hate your body. You're here because someone else convinced you it's not enough." Her head jerked up. For a second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Julian leaned back in his chair. "It happens more than you think. Someone we trust says something that slices deeper than a scalpel ever could. And we come here thinking maybe we can stitch that wound with a procedure." Claire's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked quickly, refusing to let them fall. He didn't push, just watched her, with that same quiet patience. Julian tapped her file lightly. "I will help you," he said clearly. "If and only if you are doing this for yourself, not to win back someone who didn't have the decency to love you right in the first place." The air left Claire's lungs in a rush. She stood suddenly, her chair scraping behind her. I should go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This was a mistake." She turned toward the door. Julian stood too, but he didn't block her way. Instead, he reached out gently and placed a hand on her shoulder, not to stop her, but to let her know he was still there. "You can stay," he said softly, "not as a patient, just as someone who deserves kindness, respect, and dignity." Claire froze. No one had said those words to her before, not in a way that felt real. She didn't speak, just sat back, down slowly, her hands still, trembling. Julian offered her a glass of water. She took it. They didn't talk much about the surgery after that. He asked a few necessary medical questions, but kept the rest of it simple. His eyes never strayed, never judged. When the consultation ended, he gave her a card with his personal number, not the clinic's. A note scribbled beneath it read, "For questions, big or small." As Claire stepped back out into the Seattle drizzle, she looked up at the sky for the first time in days. It was still gray, but something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, stirred. It felt a little like hope. The white sheets felt too clean, too still. Claire lay there, the hum of machines around her a low drone, the muted drip of an IV fluid beside her bed. The surgery was over. Successful, according to the nurse's brief words. Minimal complications, smooth recovery ahead, but the room was silent. No phone calls, no flowers, no waiting friends or family. There was just the slow ticking of the clock and the ache in her chest. It wasn't from the incisions, but from the emptiness. Claire turned her head slightly and stared out the window. The Seattle sky was its usual shade of overcast gray. Raindrops tapped against the glass, like a metronome, matching the rhythm of her thoughts, steady, relentless, cold. Sometime during the afternoon, her eyelids grew heavy. She drifted off, her arms curled, around a small, worn leather notebook tucked under the blanket. With her, it was the only personal item she'd brought, her quiet lifeline. Hours later, the door opened, softly. Julian stepped in, clipboard in hand. His footsteps were light, but deliberate. He hadn't expected her to be awake. When he saw her, sleeping soundly, with one hand still loosely gripping the edge of her notebook, his gaze softened. He checked the monitors quietly and made a few notes. Then, as he turned to leave, he noticed the notebook slipping from her grasp. Gently, he reached to place it securely on the nightstand. But as it tilted open, something inside caught his eye. A sketch, just a single drawing, done in pencil. The lines were light but haunting. A girl sat alone in the corner of a page, hunched and small, her knees pulled to her chest. But behind her, faint and uncertain, were the outlines of wings. They weren't fully formed, not yet. Spread just the barest hint that they were beginning to grow. Julian froze. He stared at the image for a long moment, his breath catching unexpectedly. It wasn't the skill of the drawing that struck him. It was the soul inside it, the quiet cry for emergence, the ache of someone who had been folded up. For so long she had forgotten she was capable of flying. He closed the book carefully, placing it where it would not fall again. Then he stood there looking down at Claire, her brows slightly furrowed even in sleep, her breathing slow and shallow. "She's trying," he whispered to the quiet room. "She's trying to fly." That night, long after his shift had ended, Julian didn't go home. Instead, he remained in his private office upstairs. A set of watercolors lay unopened. On his shelf, a gift from a patient who once said she hoped he'd one day use them. Tonight he did. On thick paper he painted with a steadiness not unlike his work in surgery. He let color breathe life into the sketch he had seen. The same girl, now with wings, blooming in vibrant hues of blue and violet, stood with her back to the light, no longer caged in a corner, but stepping forward. By dawn it was done. The painting sat quietly inside a thin wooden frame. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, he wrote a single sentence: "You have wings even if you cannot see them." Yet, at 6 a.m., Julian returned to Claire's room. She was still asleep, her face turned toward the window where the morning fog pressed gently against the pane. He placed the painting on her bedside table, right where she would see it. When Claire woke an hour later, the first thing she saw was not the white ceiling or the IV drip. It was the painting. She blinked, sitting up slowly, the movement causing a dull ache. Her hands reached out before her. Thoughts could catch up. She stared at it. Her lips parted. The girl, the wings, the message. A single tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She looked around the room, but Julian was gone. For the first time since the day she walked into his clinic, Claire smiled. It wasn't because someone gave her something. It wasn't because she looked different. It was because someone had seen her, really seen her. Not the outside, not the surface. Her. The quiet, aching, broken part that was trying to become whole. She clutched the painting to her chest and closed her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Claire's world blinked out without warning. She was reaching for a carton of almond milk in the dimly lit aisle of the 24-hour supermarket, trying to focus through the fatigue clouding her mind. Her vision blurred. The buzzing fluorescent lights overhead seemed to stretch and flicker. She barely registered the thud of her knees hitting the floor before everything went black. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer at the store. She was home. Her apartment was dim and quiet. She was lying on the couch, wrapped in the familiar knit blanket she kept for cold nights. The air smelled faintly of lemon and something warm. Chicken soup, maybe. The table lamp cast a golden glow across the room. And there, sitting a few feet away, in the armchair slumped sideways, with a book in his lap, was Julian. For a moment, Claire thought she was dreaming. But then her throat burned with thirst and her arms trembled, slightly as she sat up. Julian stirred. His eyes blinked open, hazy with sleep until he saw her and instantly leaned forward, his expression etched with concern. "You're awake," he said gently. His voice was quiet, but relief threaded through every word. Claire nodded slowly. "What happened? You fainted." "I was just grabbing something for dinner. I saw you collapse and rushed over. You were burning up." He paused, moving to the edge of the couch to feel her forehead with the back of his hand. "Still warm, but better than earlier." She stared at him, at the way his brows furrowed when he checked her pulse, at the bowl of soup on the coffee table still steaming faintly. He had stayed. He had taken care of her. Her voice cracked. "You didn't have to do all this." He looked at her, then at the book that had fallen to the floor. "The Courage to Love Yourself." He gave a small, wry smile. "Maybe I didn't," he said. "But I wanted to." Claire's throat tightened. "Why?" Julian hesitated, then met her gaze. "Because you matter. Not just as a patient. Not just because of what you've been through. But because you're someone who forgot how worthy she is. And someone had to remind you." Claire blinked, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. Just then a sharp knock echoed through the quiet apartment. She tensed. Julian stood and walked to the door, glancing back at her. She nodded faintly. He opened it and froze. Tyler stood there. His hair was wet from the rain, and the confident grin he wore faltered when he saw Julian. Still, he stepped forward, hands tucked into the pockets of his designer jacket. "I saw your blog," he said, his eyes finding Claire. "Everything. You've changed, Claire. You look good. Confident. Sexy." Claire stood slowly, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with clarity. Tyler smiled, a practiced, charming smile. "Maybe we could try again. Maybe this time it could work." Claire met his eyes, her gaze steady and clear. "I'm not the girl you walked away from," she said, her voice calm. "And I'll never again be the woman who waits for you to return." Tyler blinked, the smile vanishing from his face. Julian remained behind her, silent and unmoving, a solid presence at her back. Tyler opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. He just turned and walked away, disappearing into the falling rain. Claire closed the door with a soft click. Her hand rested on the wood for a moment as she took a slow breath. When she turned back, Julian was still there. "I should have said that a long time ago," she whispered. Julian stepped forward, his voice quiet. "You said it when it mattered most." She looked at him. Really looked. The man who had seen her without her armor. The one who never once tried to fix her, but just stood by and believed in her. "You didn't just carry me home tonight," she said softly. "You reminded me that I have one." Julian reached out and took her hand. "You built that home, Claire. I just made sure the light stayed on." And as her fingers curled into his, Claire knew this wasn't a rescue. This was love. Patient, quiet, and real. In the quiet that followed the storm, Claire's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The cursor blinked, a silent heartbeat on the empty screen. Outside, the rain tapped a soft rhythm against the fogged-up window. Pain. Inside her apartment, every corner held its breath. Her heart trembled beneath her ribs, not out of fear, but anticipation. The kind of quiet shiver that comes when you are about to name something you were once afraid to look at. She inhaled deeply and began to type. From scars to courage. It was the phrase she had whispered to herself in her darkest hours. The ones between midnight and morning, when the world was silent, and self-doubt screamed the loudest. When she lay awake wondering if the pain would ever be more than just pain, if her story would ever be more than just survival. It was not a title. It was a vow. The blog was her space now. Not curated, not filtered. Real. Soft in some places, raw in others, like her own heart learning to beat again. In her first post, Claire did not write about breast implants or body image, about betrayal or beauty. Instead, she wrote about shame. The kind of shame that wraps around your voice until it forgets how to speak. The kind that makes you shrink in your own clothes, apologize for your presence, and hide in pictures. She wrote about silence, how it can be louder than anything when it fills the space between who you are and who the world tells you to be. She wrote about the boy who made her feel too small, too plain, too empty. And she wrote about the man who saw her without asking her to change. She wrote about looking in the mirror for the first time without checking for flaws, but instead asking, "How do you feel today?" And then listening, really listening. She ended the post with a single sentence that had taken her 3 weeks and countless tears to write. "I am not a before or after photo. I am a person, and I am learning to love her." She stared at the sentence for a long time before she clicked publish. Then came the response. At first, a few comments, then dozens, then hundreds. Within a day, there were thousands. Messages flooded her inbox, some typed in perfect grammar, others messy and chaotic, full of exclamation marks and emojis, but they all held the same heartbeat. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't. You made me feel seen." I cried reading this. I thought I was alone. And then there was the message from a 17-year-old girl in Kansas. Claire read it at least 10 times, her eyes blurry, her hands trembling. "I used to think I had to be beautiful to be brave. But you showed me I only have to be brave to be me." Claire printed that letter, cut it out carefully with shaky hands, and taped it to her mirror. Every morning she read it before brushing her teeth. It reminded her why she had started and why she would not stop. With each new post, Julian would quietly share the link. No fanfare, no long captions. But always a message would arrive in her inbox not long after. "You are the embodiment of healing." Those 6 words never failed to stop her in her tracks. One afternoon, Claire sat by the window, her laptop warming her knees, a cup of tea in her hand. She stared at a photo she had taken days earlier, her reflection in a puddle, rain falling like tiny comets across the surface. The image was imperfect, blurred, fragmented. She had titled it "Becoming." She posted it without a caption. That night, a woman wrote to her, "That image, that's how I feel every morning. Like I'm still coming into focus. But I'm still standing," Claire wrote back. "Simply standing is enough. You're still here. That's powerful." And that was when she understood. This blog, this space, was no longer just for her. She had become a mirror, a voice, a gentle lighthouse for women still finding their shore. She was not writing from pain anymore. She was writing from power, the kind that grows quietly, like roots in the soil, like wings in a silent room. And when a reader would write, "You help me see myself," Claire would smile, hand on her heart, and whisper to herself, "You help me see myself too." The gallery was small, tucked between an old bookstore and a flower shop in downtown Seattle. From the outside, it looked ordinary, but inside it carried the kind of silence that asked you to listen with your heart. Claire hesitated at the threshold. It had been a year since that first consultation, a year since their lives had crossed, unraveled, and rewoven in ways neither of them could have expected. Now he had invited her here. No details, just a text. "There's something I want to show you." She stepped inside. The air was warm and faintly scented with lavender. The lights were dim, focused on a single wall at the back of the gallery where a single large frame hung. It was a watercolor. Claire froze. She knew the image instantly. The small girl sitting in the corner of a dark room, and behind her the faintest outline of wings unfolding, becoming. The same sketch she had once scribbled in her journal when she felt invisible, when she was just barely trying to survive. But here it was not in pencil. It was in color. Soft purples, hopeful blues, and golden light bleeding in through cracks she had not drawn. Julian had painted this. She took a trembling step closer, her eyes glistening. Beneath the frame, engraved on a small wooden plaque, were the words, "You are my most beautiful recovery." A voice behind her, soft and familiar. "Claire," she turned. Julian stood there, No white coat, no clipboard. Just a man in a simple button-down shirt, his eyes filled with something deeper than admiration. It was reverence. It was love. He took a slow breath. I have been part of many healings, watched countless scars fade, seen strength return to bodies I once feared might never move again. But none of them, he paused, his voice shaking slightly, none of them changed me the way you did. Claire stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Julian continued, his voice steadying. I don't want to be your doctor anymore, Claire. I want to be the person who walks beside you. Not in silence, not at a distance, but hand in hand through whatever comes next. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny velvet pouch. Claire's breath caught. Inside was a ring. Not gold, not diamond, but simple. Elegant silver. Engraved on the inside were 3 words. Breathe. Shine. Choose. Julian knelt. Not out of tradition, but out of truth. Will you choose me, Claire Weston? As I have already chosen you. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Not from surprise, not from fear, but from knowing. She took his hand and dropped to her knees with him, eye to eye. For the first time in my life, she whispered, I choose myself, and I choose you. He smiled wide and full of quiet joy as he slid the ring onto her finger. They didn't kiss immediately. Instead, they rested their foreheads together, soaking in the stillness that had once felt like isolation but now felt like home. Months later, on a bright Saturday morning, Claire stood in the middle of a sun-dappled park. Her sketchbook was open, but not just for her. She was surrounded by a small group of women, all laughing and talking, all holding their own pencils and paper. It was the first meeting of the From Scars to Courage art circle. She was no longer just writing her story. She was helping others illustrate theirs. Across the lawn, Julian watched through the lens of his camera. He wasn't her doctor or her photographer. He was just the man who loved her, capturing the moment his world came into full, brilliant color. She looked up, saw him, and her smile was the most radiant thing he had ever seen. It was a smile that said she was finally home, not in a place, but in herself. Sometimes the deepest scars don't show on the skin, but in silence, in shame, in the stories we're too afraid to tell. Claire Weston was once a girl who hid her body, her voice, and her truth. But through pain, through stillness, and through one man who truly saw her, she discovered something far greater than beauty. She found her worth. She found healing. She found love. If Claire's journey from silence to strength touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. Every week, we bring you powerful, real-life inspired tales of transformation, hope, and the kind of love that heals from the inside out. Because your soul deserves stories that stir it. Subscribe now and let your heart be moved.